Shabbat Shalom and welcome back. This is Torah Study for Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in sunny, awfully hot Southern California, getting ready for the high holidays, and I am delighted to be back on Torah Study once again after a long and restful summer hiatus. This morning and during the course of the year, we're going to be joined by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch. Rabbi Sherry Hirsch, good morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm sorry I had a Wi-Fi moment, but I'm so happy to be back and to be with you, Rabbi Feinstein, and on this very hot day.
It's wonderful. It's just wonderful to be together. So we're getting ready for the holidays, and at the Torah cycle, the reading of the Torah cycle, of course, puts us exactly where we need to be in these closing sections of the fifth book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, because in the storyline, the people of Israel are about to enter the promised land, just like we're about to enter a new year. And there's a sort of miscellany quality to these Torah portions, like all the stuff that Moses forgot to tell us the previous 40 years he's been talking to us, right? So I remember when we used to go on camping trips with my family, that we'd pack all the stuff as carefully as we could, and the last thing you threw into the box before you ran into the car was a big roll of duct tape and a big roll of tin foil. Because whatever problem you meet out there in the wilderness can be solved with duct tape and tin foil. And that's sort of what the Torah portion is about. So this week's Torah portion is called Ki Tetzei LeMilchama. You're about to go into war, says Moses. You're about to go into war for the promised land. And I want to tell you something about war, but it isn't about war. We have three laws, three sort of scenarios that he gives at the beginning of this Torah portion. And they're not about war at all, really. They're really about who we are and how we respond to the world. And without exaggeration, they give us three scenarios which you can call in ethics worst case scenarios. Like, how bad can it be? Situations in which human passions run wild and uninhibited, situations in which our deepest and sometimes worst impulses take control of us. And the Torah is going to try to tell us you have to rise above those moments. So the first scenario is a war, which of course is a situation of no rules whatsoever. And the war has been won, and soldiers are going house to house through this conquered place, looking for hidden combatants and stores of weapons and stuff they might want to take. And a guy breaks down a door of an apartment of a house, and there is a very attractive woman. Now, the dissymmetry now of power. He's a soldier filled with the testosterone, the rage of battle, the passion of battle. He's carrying his weapons. And here's a completely vulnerable woman. And he wants her in the very worst way. The Torah's word is chashakta, which is the lowest form of physical desire, of lust. He wants her. And what's really interesting here is that the Torah doesn't condemn him for that. It's a really interesting, you'd think that they would say, shame on you. She's a human being. You respect her dignity. It'll get to that. But its first response is not to say shame on you for your lust. It says, okay, you want her? Don't touch her. Here's what you can do. Take her with you. Take her back home again. Let her meet your mother, right? Take off the clothes she is wearing. Put on the clothes of grief and mourning, pare her fingernails, shave her head. In other words, the commentators all say, make her deliberately make her unattractive. And then you get to live with this wailing, crying woman with no hair and fingernails for 30 days. And if at the end of the 30 days you still want her, well, then you can marry her. But marry her doesn't mean you can have her. Marry her, now she becomes your heir. She now controls half of your property. She is part of your household. Now, there's a whole argument in the tradition about whether she has consent in this. If she doesn't have consent, then it is morally despicable. But even so, the idea that you have to then take responsibility for her for the rest of your or her life. And then if you don't want her, you have to let her go. You can't sell her or use her in any manner. And the idea that the question isn't the sinfulness of lust. The question is, how do you sublimate lust into relationships of responsibility? And that's the first of the three laws. The second one is you have two wives, one who is loved and one who is unloved. So right away, the tradition says, well, that's the extension, because here's this girl of your passion. And what about the wife you already had? Right? You're allowed to have more than one in the Bible, right? And then so the second sort of moral impossible situation is family. And if warfare wasn't bad enough, let me take you to my Seder table, right? And in family, there's love and unlove, there's jealousy and envy, there's all of the conflicts of marriage. And what do you do there? And the Torah again says you have to protect them both because you have a commitment to their humanity in both cases. And the third case is a famous one called Ben Sora or Mora, the intractable, intransigent, pain in the ass kid, the teenager you can't
We don't know
control.
that.
Right,
We've never heard of that.
right. And there too, I mean, it's so three cases where your passions would rule you. And the Torah says, I'm not going to condemn the passion because I know that's part of you, but I'm going to give you a structure, a social structure to protect you from your worst impulses. Sherry, Ben Sora Ramore, we
Well,
wouldn't,
I just want to say
right?
that was such a beautiful explication of those three scenarios. And one of the things I think is so wise is it's really the Torah is teaching about self-regulation, right? And I think there's something very powerful about that. Like the Torah recognizes that we are by nature often dysregulated and that it gives us a prescription to say, wait a minute, here is how you regulate in situations that are absolutely mind-numbingly difficult, right? You have a difficult child. I've never experienced that, just FYI. But of course I have,
Not none of us
right?
have, of course. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like there's a moment that you're just so dysregulated
Mhm.
because you're so activated. And the Torah is saying, wait a minute, don't feel shame about that moment. Recognize that you have a moment to do it differently and act with restraint so that you can be better than actually who you think you are.
Yeah,
It's
this
beautiful.
wonderful expression in English, you say, he pushed my buttons, right?
Yeah.
Because all three of these scenarios are button pushing moments, right? A young soldier finds this gorgeous woman, his his buttons are pushed, as it were.
Mhm.
The conflict between wives, a button is pushed, and especially a kid who pushes our buttons.
Well, and it's also interesting because it goes from someone that's anonymous to the boy in your house.
Right, the one you raised.
Right. The anonymous person can trigger you, but it's a very different trigger.
That's very
But the
important.
one you raise has all this identification with yourself. And that's the one you're really, and I like that the Torah sort of takes you there. It doesn't start with the boy you raised.
So I don't want to get too personal here, but it seems to me that the modern equivalent of this, because very few of us are going to, thank God, are going to go to war and find such circumstance, only Israel perhaps, of course, and that's an issue there. Two wives, of course, is not the situation. The kid, however, could very well be. But if there is an equivalent, a modern kind of common equivalent, and again, I don't want to push too hard, it's you just took a kid to college.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being a college student 18 years, I was 17 years old, and moving into the dorm, absolutely no adult supervision whatsoever, right? Complete, in laissez-faire freedom. And what happens to the deregulated child at that moment?
Right. I think for the parent, there's such a sense. Well, I can speak for myself. I can't speak for the anonymous parent. I can speak for myself. There's a moment of did I give them everything they need to self-regulate, right? Did I give them that in a place where there's total dysregulation and total chaos? And I
Right.
just wanted to tell you, my daughter just went to college, and the first thing she said to me is, "Don't email me all the text about Chabad and Hillel. Like, I just need a break." And she's not a week into it and says to me, "Don't be so happy that I'm going to Shabbat dinner at Chabad." And I realized that what she was asking for was some structure and regulation. And she knows that in her life. And it comes from being a Jew and it comes from how she lives. And as much as she wanted to sort of say, like, I'm my own person and I'm independent. She knows these are the structures that she needs. So it's beautiful that Judaism kind of gives them to us.
Well, because here's the thing. I mean, the irony of American, higher, quote unquote, higher education is for most of human history, you took the people who had the least amount of internal regulation and you put them in circumstances of the highest external discipline. You took young men and you put them in the military, right? Or in apprenticeships. And you took young women and you put them in convent schools, right? And here in America, we do it the opposite. We take the people with the least internal discipline and we put them in circumstances of the least external discipline. And then we say, oh my God, there's binge drinking in college, right? There's unregulated kinds of relationships. There's stuff that but of course that's what's going to happen, right? So it's exactly what you mentioned. It's really a miracle for the child to discover, I need structure.
Well,
I
and I
can't
also,
live without some kind of structure.
right. I think we all have that aha moment where, not always, but there's a moment where we don't even realize how much structures we put into place to self-regulate every day.
Right.
Like, we don't think, oh, should I brush my teeth? Should I not brush my teeth each day? But when we really become conscious of them, we need them.
Because the theory there, of course, is the great theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the great French
Mm.
philosopher, who said that, children growing up are like flowers growing between the cracks of the sidewalk, and all we have to do is keep our hands off of them, and they will blossom, right? And the idea is that, like, no, like this is what the Torah is trying to tell you is that may be for certain geniuses, but for most of us, we need to be our best. We need certain kinds of social structure, social regulation, the supports for our internal discipline so that we can grow in internal discipline and become the people that we are meant to be.
I say, Eddie, that every person, every child that we raise needs a different relationship strategy,
Oh, that's very important.
right? Because there's some kids that you got to be out in front, some kids that you got to be next to, some kids you got to be behind, some kids that you got to be a good 100 yards behind.
Mm,
But the belief is that it's always going to be like that. Like, I had a kid, one of my kids, I always stood behind her, but now I need to stand in front. So, what is the relationship strategy and how do I need to adjust it given the circumstances? And I think the Torah goes so extreme so that we recognize that all the small examples in our life are opportunities to have moments to reflect on our self regulation.
And I wonder, that one of the really interesting, quirky facts of our American culture is that, the armed forces have been voluntary for about 50 years now. And all of them are having trouble recruiting young people, to sign up for Army and Navy and Air Force. The only armed force that's not having trouble recruiting is the Marine Corps, right? Which, of course, is the most highly regulated, highly disciplined, highly demanding, right? The core, and I wonder whether it's an indication that young people sense that the kind of total freedom they've been given through their adolescence is not what they really need to become the people they're meant to be. And they're flocking to a place where someone's going to give them walls and limits so that they can grow within those places.
That's very interesting because I do think in society there's been sort of unlimited freedoms. And I think children now are really feeling the backlash of that.
Right,
It's a
right.
different conversation for a different day. But I think the fact that the Torah and Kititze inspires us to think that way is very telling.
What kind of society do you create to raise healthy people in healthy families? And what kind of social regulation do you impose, not as a way of repressing the creativity and individuality of the child, but quite the contrary, to give them
Right.
a chance to become
Who
who
they're meant
they
to be.
who they're meant to be, who they're
Mhm.
meant to be. So, Sherry, the other thing, of course, that's on our mind this time of year is we're just a couple of weeks now away from Rosh Hashanah, from the beginning of the Jewish high holidays. And tickets are going out for synagogues
We
and
got our tickets.
yeah, good. And families are making plans to gather for the wonderful meals that they'll share. And synagogues are preparing for the numbers of people. It's the great gathering of the tribe, Not even people who are alienated from organized Jewish life seem to find their way back to family and back to synagogue this time of year. Um, if not necessarily to pray or to do the introspection that demand of the holiday demands, but at least to be together with my people. And especially since October 7th, we've seen this real upsurge in that impulse. I want to be with my people. I want to support them and I want to hear them and I want to share with them. And that's what's going to happen in synagogues all over the year. But I have to confess to you, and you know this as well, that we rabbis are having a very difficult time of it because the issues that are about us this year are so powerful and yet so emotionally fraught. What does a rabbi say about Israel? What does a rabbi say about American democracy? What does a rabbi say about anti-Semitism? That's interesting and new. That gives us something that we can take home with us and help us with our lives. What do we say that isn't so political, quote unquote, that it divides the community into those who are stop listening right away and those who will cheer for us? So help us with this. You've been out of
So
this
I've
game
been
for a
on both
while.
sides.
Right,
I've been
I
on the
know.
side of giving the sermon, and I've been on the side of hearing the sermon. And I feel for my colleagues who are actually preparing sermons right now because I think there's a no-win situation. And
Hmm.
so I'm going to speak from the side of sitting in the pews.
Okay.
I think it's time we stop going to synagogue to wait for this person, the rabbi, to inspire us. And then we can leave and say whether it was good or not good, or whether it's worth our conversation over Rosh Hashanah lunch. I think we have to go with a different mindset. The rabbi is another human struggling like we are in a very complex situation right now. There's a lot on AI and spoken about. We can go find it. What about if we see the rabbi as someone helping us try to find a deeper relationship to God? What if that's the point of the rabbi? So we don't see the rabbi as this archetype that's supposed to solve and answer all my Jewish questions and all my questions about Israel and everything on this 12-minute sermon that he has prepared or she has prepared. What if we saw that rabbi as just another human being trying to figure it out, and that we're part of this greater community trying in a really difficult moment, and that Rosh Hashanah is really about finding a relationship with God? How would that shift how we sit in the pews?
How would it shift it? Because
Right.
I have a sense that, that people are waiting for my answer. The
But that's way
question
too much
is,
pressure to put on yourself, Eddie. I mean, frankly, you're not God, although you sometimes get close, right? But like, I'm teasing, but like, that's the point. This idea that people are sort of waiting for you puts this immense pressure on you. And it also puts an expectation of the people in the pews that's not realistic.
yeah. Yeah, well, part of the problem, of course, is that the whole dynamic, which is represented by the physical architecture of a synagogue, where I'm up here and you're down here, and I'm talking and leading and praying, and you're sitting there quietly with a book in your lap. I'm active and you're passive, and I'm giving and you're receiving. That's the wrong dynamic.
100%. Because what if everybody was tasked with giving the sermon this year,
Yeah.
right? I'm literally, what if we said to everybody that's coming to synagogue, you're not in charge of hearing it. You have to come with a sermon in mind, what you would actually say to the congregation, and
Hmm.
put it on post-it notes, put it in your mock store. And how would you view the expectations, or how would you manage your expectations differently than, okay, Rabbi Feinstein, feed us with your brilliant words,
Yeah, right.
right? The model's not right
Mm.
anymore,
Hmm.
right? It's not fair to you, but it's also not fair to us sitting in the pews.
Right. And of course, half the synagogue is thinking to themselves, um, don't talk politics. I want to get away from politics. If I wanted politics, I'd watch MSNBC or Fox. I can't stand hearing more politics. Talk to me, as you said, talk to me about faith, about the inner life. And the other half of the congregation says, if you don't say something about the world we're living in, you have nothing to say to me at all. And that's part of the struggle that my colleagues and I are having this time of year, is we're
But
trying to
I
find
think
it.
that's the conversation. It's
Yeah.
that your expectations of me are in a way impossible to fulfill.
Inappropriate, right?
Yeah. And by the way, what a
Misaligned.
message that is for high holidays. What
Yeah.
kind of expectations do we put on other people that are actually impossible to fulfill? And how do we manage our expectations so that we can let people be a rabbi, a mother, a sister, a brother, right? What if I said, Rabbi Feinstein, inspire me to help me get closer to God?
Hmm.
That's my expectation this year. Because I can't have you say anything that's not said about Israel. I can't have you, right? And I don't want you to go too political. I don't want you to go not political, right? Like it's a no win.
Well, the other thing, but what I've been working on and thinking about, and I know that other really good rabbis around the country um, are thinking about is there a larger narrative? Are
Mhm.
we part of a larger narrative? And what's that larger narrative? In Israel, with Jews around the world, with anti-Semitism rising, here in America, with what's happening to its democracy, um, what is the larger narrative that we are part of? And
Right. How do we go 1,000 feet
yeah,
up and say, has this happened to us before? What can
hmm,
we learn from it from before?
right,
And what can we do differently?
right.
Maybe this is the sermon that you have to go sky high.
Well, I'm thinking of this very seriously because it's and the question is, we're there, whatever side of the political divides you find yourself on, um, whether people are on one side or the other, or smack in the middle and confused and frustrated, right? There's a great deal of tension and there's
Mhm.
a great deal of fear, right? And you wonder if we could step out of the moment and look up and see, does our historical experience as Jews and does this very deep and sophisticated tradition have something to say to moments like this?
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud in that you sharing that truth is the real truth,
Hmm.
right? That this is a moment that there is so many things to say, and yet we are silent. Like, this is a moment that we could say anything, and yet it could mean nothing.
Hmm.
It's a very polarizing moment.
Right.
And so, how do I be the spiritual leader that is honest and truthful? And how do I sit in the pews? Because I don't think it's on you. How do I sit in the pews as a congregant and really look at my spiritual leader as another human trying to figure this out?
So let me turn it upside down for a moment because
Sure.
I want to finish this conversation with something personal. So I want to talk to you in the pew for a second, right? And the question is now, let's give that person in the pew something to think about. Um, so what is the question that you and I would like to ask that person to meditate on during the course of this holiday?
Hmm. I have so many questions that I want us to
Well,
meditate
pick
on.
three. So I have no number here. It's not a
Okay.
recipe.
I think the first thing that I would say is, how am I actually reacting versus responding as a Jew in the world? Like,
Hmm.
how much of us my behavior, like, oh, there's an anti-Semitic attack, I gotta go donate, or I gotta like, what's my, which is great, right? But how am
Hmm.
I reacting versus creating a methodology to respond ongoing to be a Jew in the world? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But I think it's
Yeah.
kind of complicated.
So
I,
I'll add a layer to that. Okay. What I've been thinking a lot about, I've been for some reason teaching Maimonides a lot. His laws, his traditions of Hilchos Tshuva, always come to mind when I'm doing this time of year. And one of the things he says, and he says it's not the most important thing he said, but it's very powerful. He says there's two principal religious impulses, or rather two motives, two things that push us forward in religious life. One is love and one is fear, right? Love and fear,
powerful.
right? Ahava and yira in the Torah, okay? And he says they're both there and they're both necessary, right? They're both necessary. He says, but if you're only responding out of fear, you're living on a lower religious rung, a lower religious life than a person who's living out of love. And I read this, like I taught this the other night, and I stopped it. You ever teaching something that you've read 1,000 times, and at that moment you stop and it suddenly like whacks you over the head? Like people are like, you okay, Rabbi? Yeah, I just, whoa. Because the question is, how much of my Jewish life, how much of my American life, how much of my life is captured by fear? And how much does that fear crowd out love? And what would I be like if I looked at love instead of fear? Right. And it's a very interest. It just stuck with me for a minute. And especially in moments of crisis like this, it's so much like we are afraid that, we keep hearing that over and over again. And where is the love?
This is why you're my rabbi,
No,
because what
no.
you just said is exactly most beautifully articulated question that I've been thinking is how do we not live as fear-based Jews? How
Hmm.
do we live as faith-based Jews?
And love-based Jews.
Yes, and love-based Jews. And Rambam was teaching us that. But this is why you're my rabbi, because that's exactly the question. I don't want to live as a fear-based Jew. I want to live as a love-based Jew,
Right.
right? And
And
I
and your
really,
and your child gave you a compliment this week. And I want to make sure that we highlight it, right? Your child said, I went off to college and I wanted nothing to do with Jewish stuff because I'm tired of it. I grew up in a
yeah, I'm a
rabbi's,
rabbi's kid.
I'm a rabbi's daughter. What do you want out of my life? And then she comes back and says, no, I have to get to Shabbat because Shabbat is love. Shabbat is acceptance. Shabbat is the warmth that I crave and want so much in life. And you gave it to me, Sherry. The kid would not have had that association except that you and your home and Jeff and your family have given it to her. And the community she's part of has given it to her. And that's what she told you.
Well, thank you. But I also want to say to all the parents out there, there's a lot of days that they don't say that. So I don't want any parent out there to be like, oh, and it magically works for the rabbi's kid. It does not work like that in my house.
Well,
I have
no, no,
three
no.
kids.
Sherry, you don't understand. After Shabbat at Chabad or Hillel, they're going to parties where they're going to do things that
Correct.
you and I don't want to think about. That's okay. We
Correct. Like
we
I
know
don't want
that.
to I don't want to create this fantasy like the rabbi's kid is like at college and going to Shabbat. Like my kids are like everybody else's kids, which are like
That's right.
trying to figure it out. And this was like that tiny moment that I just want to hang on to for a second.
No, and I'm hugging you for it,
And
knowing
I
full well
appreciate that.
that
But I
she
do think
she's
that goes
going
to
to the sorority party when she's done with
correct.
Shabbat.
Like let's be clear. Let's like just
That
like
takes
be
us back to the Torah, to the deregulation and the right.
right. Like she's a normal kid, but I do think it's really important what you said, Rabbi Feinstein, about this idea that really can we be Jews of love even in a time when people make us afraid,
Yeah.
even at a time when we feel like people hate us? Can we still act from our very core center of who we are as Jews?
Yeah. Good
That's
question.
that's what we should do in the pews.
Great question. So, Sherry, thank you for joining me this morning.
Pleasure,
And to
always.
everyone who's come back to join us again, I'm so delighted. We're going to do it a little differently this year. Rabbi Gelman, my dear friend, our dear friend, is having some health issues. So he asked me, he'd like to continue. So he'll be with us next week. So it'll be lovely. Um, but he'd like to do it a little slower than he normally does it, um, because so he'll be with us once a month. Rabbi Hirsch will be with us once a month. Um, Rabbi Noah Kushner from San Francisco will be with us,
Love her.
and lots of friends are coming on for this. We'll have guests and friends from all over. Um, One of the lovely things is the circle of friends among rabbis and teachers who care for each other, and I'm delighted I can hit on all of them and ask them to give me a morning of teaching. So, Sherry, look forward to having you next month. Look forward to
And thank
seeing
you
you.
for letting me be a part of Rabbi
Oh,
Feinstein's
it's a joy,
friends.
and looking forward to seeing you in Shul in a couple of
Can't
weeks.
wait.
And give my great love to your kids and to your family, and to everyone who's watching. Ki tetzei lemilchama, when you go out into the world, bring your best self, the best impulses of your life. Take very, very good care. Shabbat shalom, and stay well.
Thank you.